This is going to sound sort of familiar as we go through it, because it was last month that I preached to you a sermon entitled Christian Love in 1 Peter chapter 1. Now here we are in 1 Peter chapter 3, and again he's on that same thing about Christian love. There was a command from Jesus. He said, in fact, a new command I give you, love one another. And constantly as you're going through the Bible, your New Testament, you're constantly hearing the apostles preach to the church, love one another, love one another. It must have been a problem. Of course, a problem that we no longer have in the modern church. But, but those early folks, they must have had trouble getting along in those pews, because you were constantly, in fact, chapter 1, he kind of alludes to it again in chapter 2, but then he comes right out and preaches it again in chapter 3. So in 3 chapters, 2 sermons on Christian love are being preached. John was always saying to people, love one another. He was, of course, referred to as the apostle of love, and the church at Ephesus would say to him, why do you always say that? Love one another. Because you need it. So it must have been a problem. See, you got to remember that people don't change. Granted, this was a long time ago, but people still have the same basic character and nature that they had back then. We still have the same problems of getting along today that we had back then. We still have our own, and this is what he's going to preach on, we have our own set of wants and rights and wrongs. And he's got to kind of deal with this issue if we're going to get along in the church. So notice these verses, dropping down then to about verse 8 through verse 12. And finally. Now, why is that finally there? Well, remember, he has been talking about how different groups of people should treat one another, how that the slave and the owner are supposed to treat one another. Then he went on to talk about the church again very briefly, because there were slaves and slave owners that made up the church. So then he went on to talk to husbands and wives and how they should behave themselves. Wives, obey your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. And he went through a whole classes of people, 5, 6 different classes of people. Then he comes down to this point. He says, now let me tie all of you together. Because really, how a master is to treat his slave and how a husband is supposed to teach or treat his wife, all comes down to the same thing. It comes down to love one another, even as Christ loved you. So he goes to this, and finally, and he's going to, what you're about to read, these things that he's going to list out, they're all components of love. So listen to this. And finally, all be of one mind, having compassion on one another, loving the brothers, tender-hearted, friendly. Wow, what a thing to tell the church. Be friendly. Never give back evil for evil or reviling for reviling. But on the contrary, giving blessing, knowing that you are called to this so that you might inherit blessings. See, when you bless, you get blessed. And he wants us to make sure that we know and understand that. For he that wants to love life and to see good days, let him restrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking guile. Guile is falsehood. Let him turn aside from evil and do good. Now remember, he's talking to the church. People in church, we have to turn aside from evil and we have to do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes, and here's the warning or blessing, however you want to take it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. We get a lot of prayers answered in this church. And I think it's because we do our best to treat each other respectfully and properly. So he goes on to say, for the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears open to their prayers, but the Lord's face is against those who do evil. As I was saying last week, the number one concern of our nation has been how many children can we murder? Well, you have to figure that God's face has been against this country. And you look at how she is faltering right now. kind of lets you know that God is sort of upset. So I think the only thing we could do is try to, if we want God's blessing, we have to do, like he said, we have to be doing righteously. And so we have to be in that proper fight. We have to be showing God that we are righteous, or seeking after and doing what we can to bring about righteousness in this unrighteous country of ours, so that the Lord's face won't be against us, but he might be against those who are doing evil. If we're doing the evil, he's against us too. If we stand opposed to it, then, and we're on his side, then he has got his ear open to our prayers. All right, so let me give you this then. I'm going to cover these 5 elements of that we just talked about. We listed them out for you, so I'm going to go through these 5 elements to our love. We're supposed to broaden a new commandment. Jesus said, I give to you, love one another. Peter, who was a witness to that, heard Jesus say that. He now gives us 5 aspects to this love, or 5 elements to love. So if you're going to be loving, here's how you're going to do it. If you're going to have Christian love, then Christian love is going to look kind of like what Peter's going to share with us here. Are you ready? Okay. First of all, he begins with one mind. That is pursuing the same goals. We, as a church, and you know that's not true anymore. The church is seeking after a lot of different things. Well, the church is supposed to be seeking after the souls of men and women. That's it. The number one job of the church, go out and make disciples, baptizing them and teaching them. The church kind of gave that up. We got involved in the social politics of our day, and the church has lost her way. She's forgotten what she's supposed to be doing. We're not supposed to sit there and try to correct the world. That's not our job. Our job is to save people. If you get enough people saved, that'll change the world. They changed Rome not by attacking Rome's laws and not by saying here's what's wrong with Rome, but they kept winning people. And pretty soon there were more Christians than there were non-Christians in Rome. And Rome changed. Because then as the Christians began to vote and they became the majority, things changed. Things went better for the church. And same thing is here in America. We're not supposed to be preaching endlessly. We're supposed to be winning people tirelessly. And the more we could preach against their ills, they're not even listening. How many unsaved people do you think are tuning into our channel this morning? Probably not a lot. So by preaching at them, we're gaining nothing. Our hope is that one by one they might pick up our message. They might hear our love for Jesus Christ and their need for him. And then as they become Christians, that's what changed me. Once I became a Christian, everything about me changed. Even my political views changed. I could no longer believe what I once believed once I became a Christian. Had to change. I couldn't stand in opposition to Jesus Christ and call myself a Christian. So I had to change. And that's the thing, is we have to begin to pray a prayer of revival, that the Holy Spirit might fall upon people. That will change them. That will change them. F.B. Meyer makes this observation about pursuing the same goals, being of one mind. He said it's not the oneness of a child, but rather of a family of children who are different in age, character, and temperament, whose chosen pursuits are different, but they are one in their love and in their tender sympathies for each other. So in my family, I've got 11, there's 10 brothers and sisters, it's a total of 11 of us. Each one of us is different. There aren't any two of us that are, oh, we look similar. If you saw my brother John, you could see my face reflected in him. If you saw my brother Charlie, you could see some attributes of me in him. If you see my sister Linda, you might say, wow, that's a handsome woman. She looks, if she's watching this, I'm going to be in big trouble. The point is, we may all look different, and we all became different things. But in our tenderness and love for one another, we're unbeatable. We're unbeatable. We have the same goal, that is to love each other. In life, we're pursuing different things, but when it comes to our family, That particular goal is the same, to make sure we didn't embarrass mom and dad, and to make sure that we have loved one another properly. And so that's what he's talking about, being of one mind. It's not robotic, it's not identical, but with that same goal. The goal of the church is to bring honor and glory to Jesus Christ. That's what we do. You bring honor and glory to him, I bring honor and glory to him. You obey his commands, I obey his commands. We'll be fine. We'll get along fine. We keep our eye on the goal, which is reaching Jesus Christ and to bring people along the way. If I am trying to win people to Christ and you're trying to win people to Christ, we're both trying to bring honor and glory to him, we're heading the same way. We may, like all churches, some church down the road might think about reaching people this way. Some may go after it this way. Some people have an emphasis on the poor. Other people maybe have an emphasis on some other group or class of peoples. Some go after the Hispanics. Some go after the Filipino. Whatever the concentration is, the goal is still the same, bringing people to know Jesus Christ. And so, although as a family we have to have one mind, and this one mind is the command of Jesus Christ that you love one another. He gave us what he called the greatest commandment. The greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And he said, and the second is like it. Love your brother as yourself. Isn't that what Peter's really saying to you and to me in all of this? One mind, love God with your whole heart, love your brother as yourself. If we all have that aim in and that goal of achieving that goal, then we don't really have a lot of problems as a church. Number 2, he goes on from there to talk about compassion, being responsive to others' needs. You know, it's not, I tell people who are most worried, people who have the most, and let me tell you, the world is troubled and worried today. I mean, wow, especially this generation, it's the end of the world. Every time you turn around, it's the end of the world. This went wrong. People who have the most problems are people who think about themselves the most. Take a look and see. Self-centered people have more problems than anybody else. And the reason is they're thinking about themselves constantly. Constantly. They are the center of their universe. And so all they can see is their problem, their dilemma, their stress, and like the rest of us are going along happily on our way, we have no problems. Only they got a problem. And everything to them becomes a problem because that's all they think on. They dwell on problems because they're dwelling on themselves. And how many problems can they actually fix? None. It's like that actor had all the money he could possibly spend, and something as small as colon cancer takes him out. Here's a man who could probably afford the best doctors, who probably could afford the best health care, and he's taken out by such a small thing as cancer. What did he really have control of? And if you think on yourself, you have no protection, and you become uncompassionate. You become really an enemy of the world. That's why these kids are all out there so angry and everybody's a mob today. They have no compassion because they're not thinking about other people. Did they say, when that mob goes out, do they stop and say, hey, that man worked hard to put together that store and he's got his life on the line? No. They have no compassion toward that man. They break the window and steal everything he has worked hard for. They did not say to themselves, oh, hey, wait, I have to love God with my heart, mind, and soul. That means I can't break that window. And I have to love that man like myself. I can't steal his goods. No one's thinking like that. They're all saying to themselves, hey, I should have that. I should. And the eyes are taking what that should be mine. I should have it. Well, go work hard and you'll probably be able to get it. No compassion because they're self-centered peoples. And self-centered people don't have compassion. And so what Peter says to us is, remember the rule. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. That will take your eyes off of you. And then God shifts and says, now that you're looking at me, I want you to look at your neighbor, and I want you to love him just like you love yourself. That will cause you to be compassionate, because who doesn't care for themselves? We all do. And if I want him to be as prosperous as I am, I can make a difference in his life. Number one, I'm not going to break in and steal his goods, because I love the Lord and I love my neighbor as myself. In fact, I'm going to be looking out for his good. I'm going to be watchful for his good. Compassion. Talmage tells this story about compassion. He said, many years ago, there lay in the streets of Richmond a man dead drunk, his face exposed to the blistering noonday sun. A Christian woman passed along and looked at him and said, poor fellow. She took her handkerchief and spread it over his face to protect him from the sun, and then continued to pass on. The man aroused himself up from his debauch and began to look at the handkerchief that was given him. And lo, on it was the name of the highly respectable Christian woman of that town. Later he went to her. He thanked her for the kindness, and that one little deed saved that man from that life and saved him for the life to come. He was afterwards Attorney General of the United States. One little thing changed a man. One little act of kindness. You know, sometimes we think that's too small a thing to do. Well, what good is that going to do? But that little act changed that man, brought him to Jesus Christ, and because of that new goal, he became Attorney General of the United States. But higher than all that, he became a consecrated disciple of Jesus Christ. What would a rich young lady want to do with a drunken old man? Probably nothing. And what did she do that was so great? Nothing really. Took out a handkerchief, spread it out upon a man's face to protect him from the sun. And what was her reward? A soul in heaven. A soul in heaven. So I talked to you today about compassion, because that's part of love. You have not love if you don't have compassion, and if you have love, then compassion will become part of it. And you'll think about your fellow man. You won't be out there to wreck, ruin, and destroy. These should be foreign thoughts in the Christian church, but unfortunately, as I said, in 3 chapters, twice he's had to preach this at us. And then he goes on and talks to us about tenderness and love. He says to us, tenderness, being affectionately sensitive and caring. You know, the old law was an eye for an eye, but that's been replaced in favor of the more noble legislation, which tells us that we're supposed to hate those, or rather love those who hate us. Pray for those who despitefully use us and persecute us. Personally, I like that old one better, eye for an eye. I'm real comfortable with that one. You know, it's easy for us to get upset when someone's upset with us. And it's easy for us when they do us wrong to want to do them wrong too. We like that. We often are able to quote, well, the good book says eye for an eye. Yeah, but it's saying that's not our goal anymore. But we see it's in there, eye for an eye. Look, I just found it here, over here. And it says eye for an eye. Yeah, but you're not reading the whole sentence. It says, it was said by them of old, an eye for an eye. But I say to you, and you and I are supposed to now quote that newer section. But hey, eye for an eye is in the Bible. Yeah, but as a comparison of where we were and where we're going. Now we're supposed to pray for those who despitefully use us and persecute us. So we're supposed to be like that rock that was in the wilderness, that when it was smitten, struck with a rod, what did that rock do? It yielded water for a thirsty people. That's our job. Yield water for a thirsty people. And finally, he gives to us friendly. Odd that he would even have to tell us to be friendly. But you can walk into a lot of churches and not feel like anybody in there is very friendly. But that's supposed to be part of our love. Part of our Christian love is that of being friendly. Treating one another like brothers and sisters is part of love. We're supposed to love one another just as Christ loved us. We're supposed to remember. See, that's why they refer to us so often in the Bible as brethren, brothers and sisters, because that's supposed to be the goal. It's easy for me to be friendly to my own. And so it should be easy for us to be friendly within the confines of the church. The world, I know, sometimes we try to be friends of the world and we're not supposed to. We're not supposed to love this world. We're supposed to love those in the world, and we're supposed to love them out of this world into Jesus Christ. We ought to be willing to encourage one another, to rejoice in each other's successes. A lot of people have a problem with that. When someone is successful, they feel angry because that should have been my success. Instead, we're supposed to rejoice in each other's successes. When God lifts someone up, we should be thankful that God has lifted someone up and not regret the fact that it wasn't me. Again, we have to overcome these things. And maybe this is why, because we all feel that. That should have been me. And that's why in 3 chapters, twice he's had to stop and say, wait. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And your neighbor as yourself. Peter was the one, when Jesus said to Peter, when you are old, you're going to be led in a direction you don't want to go. And so right away, Peter says, well, what about John? And Jesus says, well, what if I want him to live until I come, what is that to you? I'm asking you to be persecuted and become a martyr for me. If I want John to live until I come, what does that matter to you? And of course, then the rumor goes out that John was never going to die. And so John says, wait, that's not what he said. He said, if I want him to live, what is that to you? But Peter, right away, as soon as he started laying on him some burden, right away he wants to look at John. And it's that same Peter who questioned Christ right now, who is saying to you and to me, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and your neighbor as yourself. If I love John the way I love myself, wouldn't I want John? Hey, I'd be excited that Jesus said John might live forever. Wow, praise the Lord for that. Instead, hey, how come I got to hurt? Why don't you reverse that? Let John suffer and let me have the good life. That's kind of the way we think. And I think that's why Peter now, who himself had that very same thought, stops now and says to you and to me, you know what? I had to change my mind too. It took me some years, but I finally grew into my Christianity. I finally became that rock that Jesus saw me as when he called me Peter. See, my name's not really Peter. My name is Simon. Jesus looked at me and said, Simon, son of John, you shall be called Peter. And I couldn't see it back then, but I see it now. I'm becoming like him. I'm becoming that stone that he wanted me to be. I'm taking my stand for him and for my brothers and sisters. I'm becoming that rock. Peter learned to be friendly. He was always ready to go after somebody. But he learned. He learned to be encouraged when somebody else was having success. When Paul's ministry took off, and Paul was the new kid on the block, and Peter's ministry was sort of waning there. He was losing influence in Jerusalem. And Paul was becoming more and more powerful. It was easy for him, I suppose, to get jealous. Hey, I've been here since the beginning. I started with him, and he's taking off already? It may have bothered him, but he learned, you know what? Hey, it's all God's doing. Some water, some plant, some water, but God gives the increase. You know what? I see God involved in Peter's ministry. and I see God involved in Paul's ministry. I see God doing through both of us what he's trying to accomplish. I am the apostle to the Jews. He's the apostle to the Gentile. And both of us are heading the same direction and accomplishing the same thing, the work of Jesus Christ in this world. So Peter learned to be a little bit friendly. And he says to you and to me, listen, you got to be friendly. You have to be excited when people in your church do better than you do. It's a difficult thing. Even early part of the church, when Jesus and John the Baptist were on the earth at the same time, and Jesus began to make more disciples than John, and John's disciples said, look, hey, that guy that you baptized, he's now making more disciples than you. And although they wanted John to do something, to say something, John said, listen, a man can only get what God gives him. I must become less, and Jesus, he must become more. Peter must have learned that lesson spoken by John that day, because eventually he learns, hey, it's not about me. What if I want him to live until I come? Hey, that's fine. John can live as long as God wants him to. John's going to outlive Peter by about 30 or so years. So a lot of people are probably thinking, whoa. But friendly, tender, compassionate, all those things are part of our process of love. So here's our conclusion then as we come to it now. Some people might say, where is God? And how can we know that God is real? Who says that the Bible is any better than any other holy book? To answer these questions, God sent his son Jesus Christ as living evidence. God also chose Peter and others to show what a difference true faith makes in a real world. So here's the once rash, belligerent, domineering, and arrogant Peter, as we had talked about, bearing witness to a life of harmony, compassion, love, and humility. What does it matter to you what I do for him? You go do what I asked you to do, is what God said. So we ask ourselves this question: what a difference God makes. To you, God witnessed to a skeptical people, just as Peter was. Remember, Peter says that God has chosen you and picked you up and settled you here among pagan people so that we might be an example. Just as Christ was an example to us, we might be an example to a lost and dying world. What are we an example of? Well, he told us last week. And then this week he's asking us to love those people now. And he's given us a picture of what that love is. So he says to you and to me, let your pride become humility, your insensitivity give way to genuine affection for others.